Thank you. It's a difficult question, but let me try to simplify it. Think of climate change as a coin. On one side of the coin is its science, the temperature increase and the increase in precipitation. And for way too long, people like you and me have focused on science, and that has meant that our common man and the policymakers thought that it was a surreal issue. It's for the future. It's about science. It's not about us. But flip of this coin is that climate change is a development issue, be it precipitation or temperature. The impact is on the development. As the climatic changes happen in our part of the world, we are sons and the daughters of monsoon. It changes its pattern, and we have to learn anew how to deal with this changing pattern. Now, let me go back to 2010. It was a riverine flood, and the biggest victim was Punjab and southern Punjab, where it was a flash flood. And that flash flood coming from Koh Suleiman was a warning that the flood is changing its pattern. It's no more only a riverine flood that comes to us from India to Kashmir to Punjab, then goes to Sindh, and by the time it goes to Balochistan, the clouds are empty and it doesn't rain as much. In 2022, it was not a riverine flood. Same monsoon clouds went to Indian Rajasthan, and from there they directly went to Sindh, and torrential rains happened. On the other side, from the Bay of Bengal, because of heat wave, heat meant that the that the heat, hot air is evaporating. It was filled by the coastal air, and that meant torrential rain in urban Sindh and all the way in Balochistan. Exactly the same pattern. And from then Balochistan, from Khyber and from Khyber Suleiman, torrential rains came, flash floods came, and from Sindh, coastal areas, we had that kind of rain that we call urban rain in Punjab, and urban rain in Karachi, and a lot of rain that had come from Rajasthan. A few years later, now in Balochistan, monsoon is even more temperamental. It started visiting our GB, KP, and Kashmir. And there we see five concurrent elements of flooding that are happening. And there's a hoax a pseudoscience that I'll explain to you what does it mean. One type of flooding is caused by GLOFs. There's an outburst, and outburst is happening more frequently and with greater intensity because of heat waves in that area. When when GLOF happens, downstream flooding has three elements. One element is it's a flash flood. It flows with the gravity. It accelerates as it comes down. Second is it brings topsoil with it. Therefore, you see a lot of muddy water. You have already just seen that. That's one sort of flood. I leave it there, and then I go to torrential rains. That's the second type, which is very widespread during this season in those areas that I just mentioned. And that also brings a lot of topsoil and accelerated water that becomes a flash flood. Allow me to say one more thing. Just the way in Punjab and Sindh we have land mafias reflected in housing societies, in floodplains, in KP, GB, and Balochistan, there's a timber mafia. And therefore, you see a lot of wood floating down. And that timber mafia cannot operate independent of state, by way of example. Now, it's not only loss of canopy or trees. Because of that, at least two things happen. One is that you lose your topsoil and the ability to generate food and agriculture productivity there for years to come. Topsoil is the most expensive soil. And second, it doesn't allow the water to seep down, and therefore, just a few months later, you'll hear that the groundwater has not replenished. That would have replenished if the canopy was there. Grasses were there to protect. So this is the second type. Now I come to the third type about which we are creating a national hoax in this country. That is cloudbursts. They do happen much more frequently than ever before, and they're very damaging also. And I don't think you have the time for its science, but just to explain, it's a lot of moisture in the cloud. It becomes like a balloon filled with water, just like a needle, then it falls down like a bucket of water at a very small place. Therefore, its destruction is very localized. If it falls on a village, the damage will be livestock, crops, and human beings and their housing. But very localized. I cannot guess 5 houses, 50 houses, 10 houses, whatever that hamlet is. That's the loss. So they're not the most dangerous thing that's happening compared to the other two. What is more dangerous is that this water then goes with gravity like a flash flood and joins the main water body that has been encroached. Our policymakers, instead of accepting responsibility that our system does not have the coping capacity or we are not well prepared, they are calling every torrential rain as a cloudburst, as if it is beyond capacity. So it's like shifting the onus on somebody else, in this case on God, right? Just the way we were shifting the onus of air pollution law to India, right? Because we don't want to take responsibility for our action. I've explained to you, thank you for being so patient. So what we see are concurrent things happening, and that makes it much more disastrous. Now, having said that, it's about the same side of the coin that I want to talk about. All these things, if you are better prepared, would not mean same amount of loss. In other regional countries, there are warning systems for flash floods, the warning systems for gloves, the warning systems even for cloud bursts. And that does not necessarily mean that you conquer the nature. It has to take its revenge for what human beings have done to the planet. But that does not necessarily mean that we need to lose 300 people every time. And I want to invoke one example. In 1970, there was a cyclone in East Pakistan. Its name was Bola, and 300,000 people died. The military dictator at the time dismissed that I don't care if they're dying. Right? He was very, very dismissive. Kindly look at his exact statement on the internet, you can see it. And 300,000 people died. Now, in 2003, another cyclone happened in Bangladesh. Same or stronger strength, and 30 people die. And government of Bangladesh at that time said 30 is too many. So when you have a resolve and you have a long-term commitment to resolve an issue over 2, 3, 4 decades, that's how you bring down the human suffering and economic suffering down over a period of time. So I'm convinced if we look at as climate change as a development issue, what we're seeing today is a devastating scene, heart-wrenching. I wish I had never had to see it again, and I'm sure you feel the same way. But there's a solution to it, and there are approaches to it, and I'll just mention only one approach that's most important, and that is vulnerability is always a local issue. Only the locals can identify where the vulnerability is. Only the locals can tell you where the solutions are. And only the locals tell you what resources we need to solve it. So it has to be a very, very localized response that we don't have so far. Absolutely correct. Very good summary. And in essence, what we are saying is that put the band-aid where the pain point is. We have more or less an idea what needs to be done. But there's a great deal of confusion in this country that who is responsible, who will do it. We are refusing to accept that this is local government function and they need to be there and they need to be operationalized. For example, we do not have district disaster management authorities notified, let alone empowered, resourced, and trained. We don't have the local government. Sitting in Islamabad, I'll say widen the road. I'll not be concerned about Nala that's a passage for stormwater. If there is no local government, Sindh government will never know that shopkeepers have encroached on that Nala and shops are now extended 10 feet into it. It's a local government function. Unless it is there, I cannot protect my communities. I cannot protect them if land mafia sells them land on the river banks. So, in other words, we need to know who is responsible. And I know fully well it's the local government that's responsible. I have no solutions in Islamabad. It's not NDMA's job to distribute water with helicopters. It's not NDMA's job to tell us how many people died in Maner. It's the local government's function. And if local government tells, I'll have greater credibility to that. It's, it's not to say that NDMA doesn't have a role. They need to look at their mandate and sharpen their contribution from that angle. And likewise, the Ministry of Climate Change and the provincial ministries and so forth. The point here is we have, to this extent, not determined who is responsible for this. I want to give you a small suggestion here because I know your time is limited. I just read in the papers that federal government or some other institutions are saying that we will give 1% of our salary. Look at the scale of the challenge and look at the response. I think we should not belittle the tragedy that's there, right? 1% of salary will not do anything. If I could make a recommendation, 5 things for the Prime Minister to announce tomorrow. One, we will not tolerate timber mafias and land mafias. Absolute no new construction there. Instead, think of plans. Between now and 2047, we will add another 250 million people approximately to our population. And at the present rate of business as usual, we'll be adding half of them into below the poverty line population. Therefore, in 2047 will be 100 years and twice as many people, same amount of people will be living below the poverty line. And guess what? Where they will be living? They'll be living exactly where they're living now. We have degraded the poor. They'll be living in riverbanks. And therefore, our losses will continue to increase. So, second thing the Prime Minister need to do is think of zoning laws, land use planning, and assign every district to identify areas where the construction would happen. If we construct housing wherever we want on the mountain slopes, of course we'll be vulnerable. Of course people will die. So I can go on, but the point is, it's not the 1% salary that can solve your problem. It's making an example of this land mafia and saying, okay, we are gonna punish at least a few, but will not allow in future. It's punishing the land mafias that will not allow you to construct your elite housing societies in riverbanks. So we have to turn around the society. We have to accept climate change as a development issue and offer development responses for this in terms of urban planning, in terms of rural planning, in terms of groundwater planning, in terms of drinking water planning, and the resilience of our buildings, our households and commercial buildings and schools and hospitals. This is the agenda of climate change. There's no other agenda of climate change. Pakistan's weather forecasting system is well advanced, and we are in very good position to make forecasts. Where we are at a loss is how to communicate to the communities. Putting that information on the PMD's website in English language does not help anyone. And centralizing in NDMA, as we have done during this year or maybe last year also, at NDMA there'll be a central place to announce, does not help. The lesson is there's a community-based early warning system that can be done. Several other countries have a practice of SMS-based early warning systems, and they not only they do early warning, but also they educate the communities what to do in what kind of under what kind of scenario, right? It's, and this is much more effective. It's being done in neighboring countries also. Uh, there may be high-tech early warning systems that we may not have cloud bursts. There may be some components that are missing, but for the most part, we are well on track. We have system. We can strengthen our monitoring systems through WAPDA and all that. But it's important when the data is not shared with the citizens, it loses quality and it loses credibility. The government can be a good data collector, but the government institutions are not a good analyst for that data. Unless in public domain, unless it's made available to universities and students and scholars, it cannot be used. So the problem with Pakistan's early warning system is a lot of data collected, but then made it secret and not shared amongst themselves or with the citizens and taxpayers. That's where the biggest challenge is. That's where the chain gets broken. So that's another area where we need to fix it a little bit. It's a property of the taxpayers. It's not a national security threat. It's a threat only to some scientists who want to control it. And PMD wouldn't want to share its data with IRSA, and IRSA wouldn't want to share it with WAPDA and so on and so forth. We need to break that cycle. That's a very difficult challenge. And the local communities have a better answers that we do outsiders. Local communities can hear it, and their animals can hear it, that there's some movement happening underneath. And they, in some ways, they have become migratory people, nomadic people. They move from one mountain range or one mountain slope to the other mountain slope, adjusting constantly. If we leave it on them, they are probably better prepared than we can advise them to do. Our capacity is so limited in that area. But there are a few lessons, at least, looking at previous years' uh, destruction in northern areas. Our power plants, our roads, our infrastructure is not attuned to that. Last time around in 2022, they were the biggest victims, and almost 30% of losses were state-owned infrastructure. And they did not do their zoning right. Even in today's clips that you can see, there are actually wires in the middle of the river. So that's where the state has failed. Not only that, state assets are not insured. Once they are gone, we'll never have the money to reconstruct them for years and years to come. In fact, in that the 2010 flood story or earthquake story is that we still have not been able to rebuild. Rebuilding is an expensive business. We will not have the resources. But due diligence in selecting the locations is important for us. So there is a two-pronged question. How do we deal with and provide some security to the local communities? And second is, how do we have state-owned infrastructure? So these questions need to be treated somewhat differently.